How do you make America less safe while also showing how unqualified you are for the job? Pete Hegseth did just that in one sentence. My name is Dina Sayegh for the Midas Touch Network. Let's break it down. So he apparently forgot that he wasn't still a cable news anchor when he decided to spitball the idea of the United States operating military strikes in the sovereign nation of Mexico, doing this spitballing with his former colleagues on Fox and Friends. Take a look.
The drug cartels have been declared terrorist organizations. And if you find that, and we know if there's Al Qaeda, we're going to hit them. I don't care if you're in Somalia, Sudan, or in Syria. If we find that they continue to fire at our border control and they continue to put fentanyl into our country, as the Secretary of Defense, are you permitted now to go after them in Mexico or wherever they are?
Brian, I don't want to get ahead of the president, and I won't. That's ultimately going to be his decision. But let me be clear, all options will be on the table. If we're dealing with what are designated to be foreign terrorist organizations who are specifically targeting Americans on our border, and we're finally securing our border. We've been securing other people's border for a very long time. The military is shifting toward an understanding of homeland defense on our sovereign territorial border. That is something we will do and do robustly. So we're already.
Nowhere in that conversation does Pete Hegseth acknowledge that in order for the United States to carry out military strikes on a sovereign nation, they need permission from that sovereign nation. And Mexican's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, has been very good at standing up to Trump. She doesn't go along with what he says. She's done that with him trying to rename the Gulf of Mexico to a Gulf America, insisting that Google shouldn't be changing the name to Gulf America. She did that with initially not accepting the plane of deportees under the Stay in Mexico program, because under that Stay in Mexico program, Mexico had to agree to receiving the deportees. Again and again, she has shown she is not afraid of Trump. So especially with somebody like that, him going on national television and deciding that the United States is more than willing to do this without any acknowledgement of the fact that that has to be agreed upon by Mexico is that predatory behavior that we are seeing by Trump with Greenland and congressmen trying to have his back. This is the new world order in MAGA land. It makes Americans less safe when the man in charge of the military announces on TV that we may invade the airspace of the ally to the south. Because if now that ally to the south becomes very worried about their sovereignty, and usually when countries are worried about their sovereignty, they create allies to help protect them. For all of our relationship, at least in modern times, Mexico has felt safe enough for us to be able to build up our military so close to their border because they never thought we were going to use it in a way that was going to harm their country. But now you have somebody on national TV thinking this is a good idea. If I were Mexico, I would want to make sure I was protected. And that's the last thing the United States wants is our ally to the south, not to be our ally, but somebody else's ally. But for whatever reason, Pete Hegseth and the MAGA world and the Trump world, they don't care about how it's actually going to impact Americans. They just like the sound of, talking about doing airstrikes in Mexico. And if it were even going to help the airstrikes in Mexico against the cartels is a whole other question too. In 2006, when the Mexican president there announced the war on drugs, they saw an increased violence because the cartels are actually considered paramilitary units. They have financial resources. They are very difficult actually to weed out and fight against. This is a problem that even Mexico has wanted to fight, and it's not very easy to do so. They even have alliances here in the United States. So Pete Hegseth's idea that he's spitballing about doing airstrikes in Mexico will probably cause Mexico a lot more harm and may not even help get rid of the cartels. Of course, it's not really surprising that Pete Hegseth failed his first Q&A when he thought it was a good idea to invade Mexico, considering he is so unqualified for the job. Qualified only maybe in the way he looks. Trump and the MAGA world and their attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion sure think that race shouldn't be a factor. Well, I don't know if Pete Hegseth realizes how much of race was a factor in his hiring. We know MAGA world likes to look the part, as Kristi Noem did and Nancy Mace did in their ICE outfits, and how Trump loves it that RFK Jr. isn't a real doctor but likes to talk about it on social media. And he really wanted that guy, that clean-cut white man in front of the Department of Defense. But Pete Hegseth and the others are so unaware, evidently, how much race played into his appointment of the position that he says something like this in the most ironic, non-ironic way.
And I think President Trump said it perfect in his inaugural address, which is what we're reinforcing in our directive as well. DOD will be colorblind and merit-based. Colorblind as it has been and merit-based as it should be, because as you know better than anybody, DEI sends the opposite signals. It's picking winners and losers. It's pitting people against each other based on their color, their background, or their gender. The Defense Department is in the business of fighting and winning wars, the highest of possible stakes. We want the best people, regardless of backgrounds, competing for those positions, ready to fight, accountable to their senior leaders. DEI does not do that. Not only does it not do it, it undermines it. So everyone's going to be treated equally based on merit. And we're making sure across the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Space Force, that's happening. There's no hedging here, Will. We're not.
Has issued a memo saying that they can no longer acknowledge and celebrate really significant events to Black people, brown people, people of different sexual orientations, to women. This isn't even about hiring. This isn't about grants. This isn't about loans. This is just about acknowledging and celebrating the fact that our country is diverse, and especially the people who serve in our military and fight and risk their lives for our country come from all different backgrounds. And so these backgrounds should be acknowledged and celebrated. But evidently, under Pete Hegseth and the MAGA and the Trump world, we can't even acknowledge the value of somebody coming from a different race other than white, from a different gender other than male, from a different sexual orientation other than heterosexuality, because they have decided to ban activities and events related to Martin Luther King Day, related to Black History Month, related to Juneteenth, related to LGBTQ Pride Month, related to the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and other special events, including those relating to Women's Day. This is where we're at, folks. This is a war. Let's not forget here. This is a war. Yes, right now it's a war of words, and it seems like, it's just an activity. It's just a remembrance. Does that really matter? It matters because MAGA, Trump, the Hegseth, the people who have all of the power, the military behind them, at the same time as they're taking away this acknowledgement of the good and value different people bring to this country, they are also blaming those same people for literally every problem that has come up since Trump was elected. Those fires in California, Trump blamed them on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The crash of the helicopter and the plane, Trump blamed on diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a reason. If you start blaming people of color or women or whatever other group you don't like of literally everything that goes wrong in this country, then people, and when I'm saying people, I mean the MAGA people, the people that voted for Trump, won't mind when those people get rounded up and put on Guantanamo Bay, as now Trump has a lot more legal leverage to do with the signing of the Lincoln-Riley Act and his announcement that we will be using Guantanamo Bay to hold deportees, as they said. Those MAGAs, those millions of Americans that voted for Trump, they won't see them anymore as humans that contribute, because they're not seeing the History Month where we talk about how they've contributed. Instead, they just hear the hate. They just hear, wow, they've just caused those fires. 10,000 homes were destroyed because of them. The plane crash, 64, 65 people died because of them. If you keep, and this, we're just 2 weeks in, folks, if you still hear every single problem, this is how you dehumanize a group of people to justify taking whatever action you want against them. And we have a history of doing that in this country. It wasn't that long ago that we sent the Japanese to internment camps and took away all their land and all their assets. We justified doing that, saying they were the enemy of the people. Trump just put in that we were signed an executive order talking about an invasion. He is signaling to us what he's planning on doing. So on the one hand, he's got the action with the deportations. And on the other hand, you're doing things in the Pentagon, like taking away the acknowledgement of the contribution. Not only does that hurt the morale, I imagine, the men and women in uniform who were being celebrated during those months and days that are being taken away, people that are being of service and risking their lives are now being told that they can't be celebrated because they're not good enough. So not only is it bad for morale, but it dehumanizes that group. It changes the narrative. And frankly, it takes away the education, because all of that Black History Month, the celebration of Women's Day, the celebration of Pride Month is a means to educate people about, you may never have encountered somebody of a different race or a different sexual orientation in your small town, let's say. And these months are a chance for you to learn that they are also just people and that they contribute just as much, sometimes more, than you.
Content moderation. Rample went on cite Facebook removal of over 18 billion intents of COVID-19 misinformation and more than 167 million pieces of COVID-19 content debunked by our network of fact-checking partners that were pressed on the platform. After then, President Biden claimed companies like Facebook were killing people since their content fueled vaccine hesitancy. On the other hand, your social media companies absolute still can be do more to scrub misinformation from their platform, Rample wrote. But on the other hand, actually doing more to stamp out the misinformation is challenging. Not because these films lack the workers of technology to identify